point here is, please take these explanations of mine as to why these areas are the least expensive within context of what we're talking about, which is Central Toronto, meaning the least expensive areas in Central Toronto are still way more expensive than other areas. In today's video, the average cost of a single-family detached home in Central Toronto in 2021 compared to 2020 and some 2019 numbers by specific neighborhood and area. Let's get to it. Hello everyone, this is Sam from SaberiSixRealEstate and Remax Realtron Realty Inc. Back with a video for you guys here today. Before we get into the video, as always, you can find my contact information in the description box with regards to my Gmail, my Instagram, and my office. Feel free to get in touch with me with any questions you may have with regards to any topics covered in this video, any topics covered in other videos. And if you have any general inquiries at all, feel free to get in touch once again via my Gmail, my Instagram, and my office information, which you can find in the description box. Lastly, before we get into the topic of today's video, as I always mention, feel free to subscribe, comment, rate, and review. Your support in that regard is greatly appreciated. As always, if you happen to enjoy this video and find it informative, if not, feel free to do the opposite of those things and unsubscribe and dislike and all that. So enough of that, let's get to the point of today's video, which is a breakdown of detached home prices by specific area and neighborhood. Now we're going to be based on the TREB districts and TREB codes. If you want a better idea, although I will display a few maps here on the screen, if you want a better idea of a more interactive map where you can go through the map and see yourself which areas or which codes and which codes correlate to which areas, you can find a link of that map in the description box, and feel free to ask me for it if you can't find it. Now, a couple of notes here. These numbers are from January to June and only for, once again, detached properties, single family detached properties. Now, first, we're going to go through the numbers. I'll read them out and I'll give you a breakdown in different perspectives, the top three most expensive, top three cheapest, which areas have increased the most, and give you more background as to why certain things are happening with regards to certain areas. But first, let's go through the basic numbers, as you can see, to set the table for the analysis to come. Starting with the basic sales numbers so far in 2021 with regards to the C1, which is the downtown, most southern part of downtown and southern central part of downtown, you're looking at 2.144 for a detached property. C2, which is portions of what most people consider downtown at the more southern central areas, you're looking at a sold price of $3.224 million, which may surprise some people because most people would assume that C1 is more expensive, but I don't know where that myth would come from. All the historical records show that detached prices in C2 in certain areas, condo prices actually are far more expensive, but we're not talking about condos. That's just to illustrate that C2 historically, with regards to detached freehold properties and sometimes condo prices, is usually the more expensive area. C3 comes in at an average price of $2.349 million in 2021. C4 comes in at an average sold price of $2.684 million. And to foreshadow a bit for later, as you can see, C6 and C7 respectively each come at much less relative to the rest of the list at $1.6 million and $1.7 million. The numbers pick back up once we get into C8 at $2.22 million, and then we once again see a $3 million average sold price for C9. And once we get to C10 to C15, two things of note: the only areas that are not $2 million in average sold price, which we will get to, is C15, which is once again one of the cheaper ones, and then C12, which you're looking at $4 million average sold price. Now, looking at this map, you can see that it's broken down by color code as well in terms of percentage increase. But first, before we get into the percentage increase part of this video, let's break it down in terms of the three cheapest. And maybe cheapest is the wrong word. Let's use three least expensive. And those would be C7, C15, and C6. Once again, C7 coming in at 1.891, C15 coming at 1.867, and C6 coming in at 1.764. Now, one of the reasons, and C7 actually, I've actually done a lot of work in C7, is because you have a lot of older properties, a lot of older bungalows that typically older people happen to occupy, or maybe a lot of first-time home buyers who want to purchase in Toronto but can't really afford the more newer builds. As a result, they buy something much older, such as, once again, a bungalow, which they don't really make anymore at the same frequency that they used to, for sure. And as a result, and this is once again specific with regards to C6 and C7, a little bit more towards C7, this analysis. The point here is the reason the average sold price, once again, is one of the least expensive in these areas is because there's a lot of older properties in C7. And take into account something I should have probably mentioned, that this is not the entirety of Toronto, this is central Toronto analysis, right? We're not looking at the east side of Toronto, the west side of Toronto. So in terms of C7, you do have these older bungalows that builders love, and that's why you see a lot of development in C7, because bungalows are built upon larger lots, because given its inherent structure, a bungalow, since it doesn't have 2 stories, maybe it has a half story, it's a side split. Point is, most of the living area, dining area, kitchen area, sleeping area, in terms of bedrooms, is located on 1 story. As a result, you're not going to build vertically, you're going to build horizontally. You can see when development was occurring in the 70s and 80s, when scarcity was much less of an issue in terms of land, why bungalows were more not only popular, but feasible, because once again, there was less scarcity with regards to land. As a result, builders can afford to build more horizontally in terms of detached. This is all to say that C7 is kind of filled with these bungalows. These older properties do carry down the average. And then the same thing could be said for C15. Now, C15 is interesting in this regard because it is very bifurcated in the sense where the western portions of C15, once again, feel free to pull it up on the map if this map on the screen doesn't do it justice, but C15, the western portions are very quite expensive areas. I mean, Bayview Village, in terms of both condominiums and freehold detached properties, semi-detached townhomes, very expensive. But the further east you get towards Henry Farms, not to say a lot of expensive options cannot be found, but the closer you get to Fairview Mall, around there you have older, once again, detached properties. Not bungalows necessarily. You don't have the brevity of bungalows that is present in C1, but you do have a lot of older side splits, a lot of older 1.5 stories, and at times these residential streets that are occupied with a lot of these older properties that are different from C7, but nonetheless in commonality in terms of them being a bit older. It's a little difficult for development, in part due to these residential streets being ended with a lot of rental apartments. And a lot of builders, if they're looking to buy a lot, tear down the current structure upon it and build a newer one, or maybe buy a lot, divide the lot and build 2 detached properties, which doesn't really occur as much with C15 as it does with C7. When they're looking to develop, basically, the point is, if it's right next to or close to a rental arrangement or a purpose-built rental apartment that happens to be a bit older, as is the case in these areas, they're a little apprehensive about that. But at the end of the day, please keep this in mind. I'm giving these explanations within context as to why these places are cheaper, but let's be honest, they're still 1.6, 1.7, right? If you're, living in perhaps, let's say, parts of Richmond Hill, which are still pricey, but in Milton, let's say, or Uxbridge, or east side of the city, maybe in Whitby, Oshawa, Ajax, if you're looking at a $1.7 million price point, you think this is very expensive, and you already, if you're living in some of those areas, you're living in areas that prices have gone up anyways. The point here is, please take these explanations of mine as to why these areas are the least expensive within context of what we're talking about, which is central Toronto, meaning the least expensive areas in central Toronto are still way more expensive than other areas. And then C6 is obviously the least expensive out of all of them in terms of this entire list, coming in at 1.7 million. But don't be fooled. And then we're going to get to this in a bit when we go through the year over year increases. That's later on in the video. But don't be fooled here. C6 has seen tremendous growth. Now, of this list, let's take a look at the 3 most expensive areas in terms of the highest priced averages for detached properties in terms of the Toronto real estate market as it relates to Central Toronto. And that would be C2, C9, and C12. C2, C9, and C12 are the only ones that break the $3 million barrier. Obviously, C2 at 3.2, C9 at 3.9, and C12 breaks the $4 million barrier at 4.1 million average price. C12 is obviously notorious for housing the bridle path, which is something equivalent of the Millionaire's Row in the city of Toronto. And here simply you have some of the most notorious and famous celebrities in the city of Toronto, CEOs, rich business people, just wealthy people in general, whether domestic or international, living in these areas, filled with large detached properties that can be sometimes referred to as mansions. And same point here applies to a lesser extent to C2, where if you just want to take the most southern half of the city of Toronto in terms of central Toronto, so ignoring the east, ignoring the west, ignoring the north central, just looking at the southern tip of central Toronto, C2 is where you find the most luxurious areas, the southernmost luxurious properties on average. And some of the more notorious areas in C2 that you may be aware of is the Annex, Summerhill, Davenport, some of the more expensive and well-trafficked areas in terms of transactions. Now let's look at the trends in terms of, we were just discussing 2021 numbers, but here clearly we have 2020 numbers, 2019 numbers. Let's look at the year-over-year changes, and I made this graph to illustrate it. Just a simple graph with the 3 bars, whereas blue is 2021, red is 2020, and yellow is 2019. Now, what I find very interesting is 2 of the areas we just touched on, C9 and C12, where we discussed within the context of the 3 most expensive according to this list and this heat map, actually didn't have a steady increase in the last 3 years, as you can see in terms of the percentage increase and in terms of illustrated visually in the bar graph here. You can see that 2019 average prices were higher than 2020. So we saw a dip in 2020 prices in terms of the average sold price, both once again depicted in the bar graph and with the red line in terms of the numbers on the screen as well. In terms of the numbers, in terms of percentage increase and decrease. So 2020 was a dip from 2019, yet from 2020 to 2021 was a large increase. C12 saw a 23% increase and C9 saw a 26% increase. And this increase put the prices higher than they even were in 2019. Now, what does this really tell us? Well, one grand takeaway you can apply to this is that the most luxurious areas, which these are the most luxurious areas, and this is a basic lesson of microeconomics here that could be applied to this as an explanatory note, is that when you have a shift in the marketplace in terms of uncertainty, instability, and 2020, what was 2020? It was unsecure, it was unstable due to the worldwide event. Prices that are most likely to kind of shift are the luxuries, are the most expensive that are not necessities. And so in that sense, the most expensive luxurious units, areas in the city of Toronto, when there's instability and uncertainty within the market, as was the case last year with the worldwide event. Thus, to me, it's not that much of a surprise to see the prices dip in 2020 and then go back up in somewhat of a V curve in 2021. But C2 did not face that problem because C2 actually, as you can see, had a precipitous increase where in 2019, you were looking at 2.3, and then in 2020, we were looking at 2.9, and then once again in 2021, now we're looking at 3.2. So there, it was not a V curve. There, it was just a steady incline of a curve. And then the only areas that actually saw a negative percentage, so it decreased, and these are the 2 only areas in this regard, from 2020 prices to 2021 prices were C3 and C8. But to be very fair, C3 is very, very marginal, negligible, even inconsequential dip, because you're looking at a 0.9%, so not even a full percentage point dip, but nonetheless a 0.9 percentage negative dip, going from an average sold price in 2020 of $2.3 million, going from an average sold price of $2.371 to $2.349, where the biggest dip occurred year over year, only looking at 2020 to 2021, was actually C8 to the tune of a 12% dip, going from $2.55 million to $2.29 million. And then another area we touched on before in terms of C7, once again, we see that precipitous consecutive increase, a little more actually stable. Believe it or not, C7, in my opinion, is one of the lesser volatile areas because, in my opinion, it is somewhat of a perfect mixture of most things that make up a fair and balanced market. It is very competitive. Not to say it's not competitive, and it's especially very competitive from the agent side of things. There's 7 to 8 agents in any given week going door knocking in that area. The area that saw the biggest increase in terms of pure percentage points was a 30 percentage point increase from 2020 to 2021 was C13, going from $1.6 million to $2.255 million in terms of 2021. The reason here is that a lot of the people who were actually moving up, right? So we are a lot of times hear about downsizing, we hear about upsizing. A lot of people who were selling already expensive and at demand properties in maybe in more southern areas in central Toronto, C2, C4, C1. A lot of these people were actually trying to migrate a little further away, but still in the city of Toronto, still in central Toronto, and they migrated towards C13. Now, that does not explain for obviously the entirety of the 34% increase. It's only a small part of it, but I have gauged out there and, working with people and speaking to my colleagues who work in C13, they have said they've seen a lot of money come in from more southern central areas in the city of Toronto to that northern, more eastern part of central Toronto. And the Don Mill Lawrence area, the Winfields area, the Parkwood, they're very good areas. And on top of this migration of money coming in, and on top of this established money migrating there in terms of real estate, you do also have some fair amount of development that occurred. To be fair, more so in terms of townhomes, don't really impact the numbers here, but nonetheless, there was development occurring in C13. But to be very honest with you, to me, even this is an inadequate explanation. I actually would like to take a deeper dive on just why we have seen a 34% increase in average price in C13, and maybe that'll be its own separate video, standalone video. Anyways, this is Sam from SaberiSixRealEstate and Remax Realtor Realty. This has been a long enough video in my opinion. Let me know if you have any further questions with regards to any subject covered in this video or any subject covered in other videos or anything that comes to your mind in terms of the Toronto/GTA real estate market for both freehold and condominiums. Anyways, feel free to subscribe, comment, rate, and review. Your support in that regard is greatly appreciated. And once again, yes, you can find my contact info in the description. As I always say, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to view my videos. And I really hope that you enjoy them and find them informative. And as I always say, thank you very much so for watching. Stay safe and stay tuned.